Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
God or goddess, see also creation, see also the devil, see also religion, and religion, see concepts. Value and wise advice from the Billy Meier contacts. Arahat Athasata, 2019, Figu Landesgruppe, Canada, pages 241 to 246.
It comes from the tremendous energy richness of the Ur-life and the creation which are responsible for the life of the entire universe. This undefinable and mysterious Ur-Ife embodies the actual breath of life, which universally enlivens all and everything. The Ur-life, however, also embodies that secret, which indeed a human being will never be able to fathom, the Ur-creation itself. It would, however, be false, arrogant, and unresponsible to call this Ur-creation or the creation God, for neither the Ur-creation nor the creation are God or anything similar. The word God is only an ancient term of an equally ancient language of a foreign people. A foreign extraterrestrial human race, who were the actual ancestors of a part of the Earth human beings. Up to the present time, their language still could not be proven, but it ought to be the one which is known as Ancient Hebrew. It is for sure, however, with absolute certainty, even if the theologians and scientists etc. deny it, that the word God stems from this ancient language and has not the slightest to do with the creation. The expression God was from time immemorial used as a designation for human beings who, on account of their consciousness-based powers and their abilities resulting from them, were able to master and accomplish things which were denied to kings and emperors. In most cases, these God-human beings were great scientists. Because of their abilities, these human beings were consequently called gods or goddesses, which meant nothing other than standing above the kings and emperors in a consciousness-based sense. The exact translation of the designation God into the German language is King of Wisdom, standing higher in esteem and honor than the rulers of the land themselves. Those who were called God were consulted by the rulers of the peoples themselves, and as well were revered by the people as human beings with tremendous knowledge and ability. Catastrophes, megalomania, mishappening and wars, etc., as well as slow degeneration, however, have in the course of the thousands of years also taken their toll on these gods. Consequently, they slowly died out or developed into tyrants. With time, they only still exist in the memories of a few human beings, while some other of these gods fled and began to tyrannize different worlds. Memories of the tyrannical rule of the gods were to blame for the fact that the ones called God lived on in myths and legends and began to influence the earth human beings. Some resourceful leaders of people let their godliness get very badly out of control of the goad human nature, and called themselves the creation itself. Through tyranny and barbarism, they forced the human beings to be subservient to them and to worship them. But it happened that sub-leaders of these gods likewise wanted to exercise their might, and therefore, in the name of the respective god, raised themselves as leaders above a human race. If the respective gods themselves were not already tyrannical and domineering, then the leaders of the human race most certainly were. As domineering leaders over great masses of peoples, they took up the old legends and myths in which the gods lived on, and developed them into an irrational teaching of a single and all-dominating God. As rather clever and resourceful leaders, they formed formulas, laws, recommendations and prohibitions from this, and attributed them to the gods. And already the religion was born. This in turn gave rise to a single God who was made responsible for all creation and all happenings, and who should embody the love and salvation. Ask its explanations, Part 6.
My teaching, which I spread in these lands, is not new, and it is well known to the scribes. But they falsify the old teaching of the prophets which was handed down to them, and is very learned. but they disdain and falsify it and interpret it to their own advantage. Therefore, they accuse me of lying because I preach against their lies. From the old teaching of the laws of creation and the spirit, they have set up erroneous cults which take freedom of consciousness from the human and drive him into servitude, whereby they can enrich themselves with his possessions. From the spiritual teaching, they have made a false teaching, and they have abased creation to a human entity which they call God. But God is a ruler over humankinds and over worlds, and he can never be put on a level with creation, because its being is the highest, and outside of it, truly, nothing exists. They have transformed the teaching of the Spirit and the laws and recommendations of creation into a very evil cult, and frighten the humans with death, with the vengeance of their bloodthirsty God, and with sword-bearing angels. They teach the humans to be afraid of the splendor and allness of creation because they deny its existence and replace it with their God and their saints. As I therefore speak and teach of creation, the texts are being falsely modified in such a way that mendacious words are put into my mouth, and I am supposed to have spoken of a Father in heaven, the gathering of a host of angels and many other false things. But I have never done that because these forms do not correspond to the truth. I have always faithfully spoken of the truth of creation as being of creation, and of God as being of God. God was never put on a level with creation by me because God is a creature of creation, as are you and I and every other human. In his form, he is a king of wisdom and a ruler over human races, in the same way that a king or emperor also is a ruler over human races on earth. But creation is the immeasurable secret and the creation of every creation. It is omnipotence, knowledge, wisdom, love, omniscience, and being. And my teachings speak of it alone when I talk of it, and its laws and recommendations, and of the power of eternity. Translators note, sentence 226 is omitted in the original. Truly this alone is the truth and nothing else.
Contact Report 001. The human being may realize that a God can never assume the role of the creation or determine the destiny of the human being. A God is only a ruler and, moreover, a human being who mightily exercises rule or tyranny over his fellow human beings. God is not the creation, but only a creature of her, like all creatures dependent on the creation. However, the human being chases after his or her religious irrational belief and claims that God is the creation herself. Contact Report 003.
And since these human beings never want to bear the responsibility for anything and everything themselves because they are perhaps too unknowing or too cowardly, they simply pass it on to something that is supposed to stand above them and direct their destinies. They then call this something God and religion. A simple buffer and RAM block into which one can pound everything. A fantasy picture, onto which one rolls all one's own responsibility.
It is really as you say. The Earth humans are not able to bear and recognize their responsibility themselves, although they should do so. So they roll everything off and onto something that they put above themselves in their imagination, things that they simply call religion or God, that are supposed to relieve them of the responsibility. There is no interest in showing ourselves to the general public. Their consciousness is still short and small and confined in religious enslavement. On the one hand, the Earth humans would worship us as gods in their short reflection, as they did already in earlier times, and on the other hand, there would be many among them who, as criminals and greedy for might ones, would seize our beam ships. Contact Report 005. The humankind of the distant solar system, 2/3 of which were destroyed at that time,
found a new beginning which was hard and full of privation. Nevertheless, in less than 9 centuries, the human beings built up a new civilization and culture, created and driven out of the hardship arising from cosmic forces. Their spirit and their consciousness and their knowledge refined themselves rapidly, and soon the succeeding generations had reached a technology which, without any imagination, defied all possibilities. And there came the time when the descendants flew out into the unending expanses of the universe in round, plate-like flying ships with beam drives. Other solar systems and planets were flown to and expeditioned. New worlds and possibilities opened up in order to transplant the peoples of the home planet, which had meanwhile become too small for the new humankind. The scientists, with their spacecrafts and abundantly provided means of all kinds and fantastic application possibilities, used the dimension gate known to them to, in another space-time configuration of the Dern universe, reach the Milky Way area and explored the space for ever newer things. They found many new habitable worlds and solar systems, which they often made subservient to themselves, using their beam weapons in short, one-sided fights, in order to conquer them for the settlement of their race. However, apart from their horrendous material and gene-based technology, they also perfected their consciousness and their spirit, so that nothing which they wanted to experience remained foreign to them anymore. The use of their powers of consciousness became implicitness to them, and so they gradually raised themselves to rulers vis-a-vis their peoples. They called themselves kings of wisdom with the word Ishwish, which is on the earth translated as God. Far superior spiritually, and in terms of knowledge as well as consciousness to the normal people, they soon dominated it in evil dictatorial form.
Contact Report 018.
Very many human beings fear to live in the sense of the creation, and they think and assume that they would only have to remain with the one which is to take away their anxiety about the death, with a god of a religion who has promised them in conscious, irrational teaching, and for his entirely own benefit, to take away their anxiety about the death if they would in irrational belief and submissively believe his lies, whereby they get into his enslavement and become consciousness-based unfree.
Contact Report 026.
So I start from the assumption that certain forms of life which are strange to you are trying to wander around from the vastness of the universe on our Earth and in the space of the world, and to influence other forms of life in various forms. On the other hand, I also suspect that one or more groups of descendants of your old race have not yet returned to you, and that they are still living according to the forms of a deity. Since they still have to live according to the old forms, it can practically only be that they influence many life forms, and also the Earth humans according to this, and appear as emissaries of a god.
With your speculations, you are very right, because there are other forms of life in the earthly space than just ours. There are also still some splinter groups of our own former races here, but also on other worlds where they still live according to their old forms. They constantly try to influence the life forms, especially the Earth humans, according to their forms. Already the ancestors had appeared as gods, and they still do. They are anxious not to release the Earth humans in particular from this form, and to continue to make them dependent on themselves through stoic references to religious heresies, etc., and to cast them under their spell.
Contact Report 031.
In particular, the heresies of earthly cultic religions rest in cursing and blaspheming and denying the creation. It as omnipotence is questioned and replaced by blasphemous heresies by a God who is supposed to be the creator and who is also called Lord of all things. But the creation is in truth the Gevalt, the Almighty and the glory itself. Through various circumstances, and not least through the megalomania of human creatures, ouds, wisdom kings, people's leaders and human race leaders, who are called God in earth-human terms, have been pressed into the conceptual form of a creator and declared mendaciously to be the highest in the universe, namely creation itself. This is still evident today in the form of address of earth humans when they speak of their God as the creator. The concept of the masculine, of he and him and the God, could not be erased even over many millennia by the representatives of religion. Consequently, this concept still bears witness to the humanity of the God and Creator and the gods on earth today. Earth humans, however, in their thoughtless stupidity and in their unwillingness to surrender to the truth, have been incapable of thinking about these things for a very long time. Stupidly, he or she continues to defend the cultic religions which are without exception attuned to some earth human being and to a heavenly deity. And practically every religion refers to a founder of a religion who, with one exception, is worshipped and glorified as the chosen one of creation, whereby the believers then practice a cult of man, which, however, is ultimately inherent in all earthly cultic religions. Creation itself is completely disregarded and condemned to nothingness, because through the cultic religions it is replaced by the madness of a human substitute and by a God creator. Creation itself, as the absolute omnipotence and glory of all being and being, is viciously denied and condemned. Whether this is done knowingly or in compliance with cultic religious heresies or as a result of other worldviews, it remains the same. In any case, it means the most monstrous blasphemy of the creation that can be thought or uttered by any life form. Apart from the creation itself, nothing is venerable, universal loving, omnipotent, eternal, and awesome. It is the beginning and the end of all being and being itself. Apart from her, nothing is existent.
Contact Report 039.
I would be interested to know what the dear God actually looks like or looked like.
Which one are you thinking?
Of the great Ishwish, who still wanders like a ghost today through the Christian religion.
There are two of those.
I mean the old dear God, Ishwish the barbarian as I have christened him, or the Lord Jehovah, as he was commonly called.
Thus the one of the old time or Moses time.
Exactly. I mean the superhero, that ambivalent subject who, on the one hand, proclaimed himself as the creation and boastfully spoke of universal love, mercy, and justice, but who, on the other hand, heedlessly demanded innocent human blood and allowed millions of Earth humans to be brutally slaughtered at his command.
That is a very accurate statement. His image is known to me very well. You call him the biblical God, but with us, he is called the unjust and cruel one. He came to his end approximately 2,150 years ago. He was a very malicious and power-hungry life form who led his regime together with another and good Ishwish and drove countless Earth humans to death and destruction.
And to whom today's Christianity still pays hellish tribute.
Sure, unfortunately, that is so, for his malignant influence was enormous.
That is well known to me. But how would it be now, if you would draw this supertwit for me? Do you still have my paper and pencils?
Sure, but you speak very disparagingly of Jehovah.
Should I still pay homage to him, then? After all, he is the most to blame for the fact that we on the earth live in the insanity of his cultic religion, and that millions of innocent Earth humans were murdered on his account. Should I heap praise, then, on this twit just for this?
You should not do that, for he was evil and unjust.
It was probably the best solution that he was deposed by force.
Contact Report 070.
In particular, the scientists recognized, in the course of time, the unlimited possibilities of their consciousness-based powers, so they pushed and expanded them by immense accumulations of knowledge until they became a matter of course for them, and they swung themselves even higher up, whereby they soon became absolutely dominant over their peoples. According to their great knowledge, they were called Jeshvish Ishwish, which is synonymous with the name God, which is familiar to you and which means King of Wisdom. The Jeshwish, far superior to all people in terms of knowledge and ability, subjugated all life forms, cast a spell over them, and ruled them in a dictatorial form. He was succeeded by his daughter Plearya, and Shrish, female queen of knowledge, goddess, and consequently the home system, the Asel system, was also renamed the Plearya system, because for the human beings of that time, who were Titans, symbolization was still very much in force, as it still is today with the human beings of the earth, which corresponds to a perverse illogicity.
Contact Report 099.
You really cannot do a shortcut just because everything is not going as you envisioned it would. Remember that we cursed earth moles are as ignorant and barbaric as the last monkeys from the jungle. Consider for once that the truth has not been fed to us off of spoons, and that your fair ancestors were involved in this damned mess. Just remember that you cannot turn an earth human into a pig and then give him or her only one short chance to develop into a human being again. Remember, damn it, that your ancestors stole and ruined all our knowledge, raised themselves up before us as gods and god creations, and that they were the ones who rejoiced in our ruination and exploited us through it, absolutely knowing that we had to turn into the most miserable mess in the entire universe. It is therefore damn unfair if, for once, you take a close look at everything from our side, if you just want to leave us lying in the dirt. We are barbarians, unknowing poor and damn pigs, yes, but we became that through your ancestors, my son. Consider that. And if you already know that, and you know that damn well, because otherwise you would not have come to us to help us, and to bring back to us what your heroic, damned ancestors have ruined for us. Why do you not feel obliged to help us to the very end, even if we are still quite stupid and primitive in our cursed ignorance, because all our knowledge has been stolen or ruined?
Contact Report 503.
But now I have a question, which, respectively, your answer is interesting for some human beings. It concerns the terms God and Goddess, which are not only used by us human beings of the earth, but also by you, but in a completely different form than with us. So you use these terms, for example, in relation to the meaning of names, but also in fairy tales, etc., as I know.
That is correct. For us, Pleyarin, the terms God and Goddess have always had the meaning of an imaginary, fantastic fable creature who rules, exercises power, or protects human beings, animals, and plants, or any other things. These are instructive fairy tales, respectively invented and fantastic stories. However, imaginary mythical creatures like a god or a goddess are not real in any way and therefore cannot be equated with a religious god or a religious goddess. Because there are no such religious or other religious fantasy figures like a god or a goddess, only creation. The terms God and Goddess already lead back to the ancient history of our ancestors. To the Lyrians, who also brought these terms God and Goddess together with fables, respectively fairy tales, to earth. Thus many such fables or fairy tales lead back to our ancestors as well as to us Pleyarin, whereby the earth humans have partly transformed and changed the story contents to earthly things and conditions. But back to the terms God and Goddess, which have been used equally in our languages since time immemorial, as is also the case in the German and Swiss German languages. In the German language, the term has found its original form back to God, While Earth humans in all languages known to us have transformed the term God into all kinds of other terms, and it still exists today in other modified forms. In the course of time, these transformed terms gave rise to the names of God as they are used today in all earthly languages. With regard to our traditional terms God and Goddess, however, the terms God and Goddess have developed again in the course of modern times, especially from the Germanic term Gouda, which was to be understood as a bisexual, that is to say, in the form of a male and a female god. Before the Germanic term Gouda, the terms Gotu and Godon were common for God, whereby the term Wudon developed from Godon. The two terms were also used by our Lyrian ancestors as god and goddess in the same way, as it is also the case with us. That is to say, as a term for mythical creatures, respectively fantasy creatures, which as an imaginary power stand above all things, but which are not in any way equated with creation. From time immemorial, the peoples whose origins can be traced back to Nocedemion have consciously recognized and regarded universal consciousness as the highest form of energy and power and as the origin of all existence. As a consequence, it never appeared that a god or a goddess would have been recognized or appreciated as universal creative force respectively as creator or creatress. A god or a goddess has always appeared as a pronounced mythical creature or as a fantasy figure of higher power in our fables respectively in fairy tales, which are offered in tearful or satirical or joyful forms, mainly for children, although adults also take pleasure in such stories. Basically, these fairy tale narratives are connected with doctrinal factors, but also with legends and true events, which are embellished in the fairy tale narratives, whereby often a male or female mythical creature is interwoven, a god or a goddess. This, however, never leads us to the false doctrine of a God creator or a creator of all things, because our children are basically taught at an early age that fairy tales and their characters, etc., are only mythical creatures, and that a god or goddess also only correspond to freely invented characters. This is why it is possible that even small children, as well as older children, can learn in a way appropriate to their thirst for knowledge through such fairy tales in which, for example, animals and creatures speak, and to which human behavior is attributed. Our fairy tale narratives in this regard are designed to contain generally accepted truths regarding the way of life and behavior of human beings, which are illustrated as practical wisdom, etc.
That probably also explains why you and your Lyrian ancestors, who also come from your space-time structure, have gods and goddesses in your male and female names, which are certainly also considered mythical creatures, right?
That is indeed so.
Then again, something about God. This term has consisted of 4 letters since ancient times, at least since the time of the Lyrians, your ancestors. Was it also like that before in other languages of your ancestors' respectively primeval peoples?
I can tell you that this was indeed the case, because the two terms God and Goddess go back very far. But without exception, the terms were only used in relation to imaginary mythical creatures, and that for millions of years and before our distant ancestors came to Earth. That is what we have been told.
So these terms were used by your primordial people when there were no humans on Earth? Not even early humans?
I have expressed this in my words, yes.
Which I also understood. But what is interesting about God is that in most earthly languages, the terms for God also have only 4 letters, as I have listed in OM as follows. What is of even more interesting value with regard to the name God is that in all the existing languages of the earth, it is always written with only 4 letters, and that the relevant Kabbalistic calculations of these languages always evaluate the name God as death, destruction and damnation, etc., and in order to demonstrate that the name of God, the name of death and destruction, is indeed written with only 4 letters in all languages, since time immemorial. Let the following brief list clarify this.
Contact Report 827.
The logical, sensible, and reasonable thinking of the Earthlings has unfortunately long since gone by the wayside and been replaced by an illusory thinking, which has been replaced by the belief in a dear God. As a result, logic, understanding, and reason are only words in the linguistic repertoire, but their value is neither used nor understood. The delusional belief in a dear God, who is not truthful and corresponds only to an imaginary fantasy, keeps the human beings from their own real thinking and makes them tractable and in bondage according to what the preachers of lies and autocratic rulers want from them. Thus, peoples can be dominated and seduced into developing hatred against each other, smashing each other's skulls, advocating the wars that rulers unleash in order to then unilaterally take sides against the alleged enemies and help to murder them.
Contact Report 838.
What we were able to ascertain was that already at the time when foreigners came from the 7-star regions and did many things which pose many riddles, for today's Earth humans, already at a very early time, confused forms of belief developed from this, and the Earth humans regarded the foreigners as higher beings, and accordingly worshipped them as gods. These were already the first forms of belief, from which, as a result of false ideas and inevitably resulting fantasies in the course of time, what came into being as religion arose and has survived until today. The false meaning of the whole was then misunderstood under the name of religion, which was understood as a regression, which was namely to lead back to the true origin of that from it a belief as well as a worship of those who had traveled far arose and came into being in the manner that they were considered to be gods. But with regard to the far-traveled and their worship and belief in them as gods, it was in time no longer avoidable that they were very quickly regarded as all-creating deities, and from this arose forms of belief that steadily deviated more and more from the effective reality and truth. Fantasy ideas were given a place, which were completely separated from all that really was. From this developed just as quickly a primal belief in a divine power attributed to the distant travelers, because the distant travelers were able to do all kinds of things, such as technically conditioned miracles of buildings, etc., which were considered as such at that time, because they appeared as such to the Earth humans, because they themselves were not capable of doing so, just as they also did not have the necessary abilities, knowledge, techniques, and apparatus and devices, etc.
Contact Report 840.
The further question about the dear God, why the delusional believers are addicted to such a one. This delusional belief is nothing but sheer idiocy, for if the religionists and the philosophers of both sexes, etc., claim that a superintelligent, unknown, creational force in the form of a god is the only good explanation of the origin of life and the intricacies of nature, then it can only be said that a human being who claims such a thing must be sick and completely stupid in the head. Where is this God supposed to have come from? How is he supposed to have come into being? And that he is supposed to have been eternal? This is answered so flimsily that the stupidity and idiocy of the answer shouts high to heaven. No God is the creator of heaven and earth, not the Almighty and not the Comforter, as he is also not the eternal, not the immovable, unchangeable, and not the ruler of the universe. There is also no indescribable, uncreated, and eternally dwelling one in heaven, who observes his creatures, with whom human beings cannot make contact because he is supposedly too exalted, etc., but who is to be worshipped. In truth, the imaginary God is not a higher being that stands above nature, life in the universe, for no living being is capable of this, not even the human being who, in his or her delusions of grandeur, believe that they can do this and destroys everything with their imbecilic thinking and actions. Those lunatics who claim such nonsense about an existing God should think about this. But since they cannot really think, but only indulge in illusory thinking, it is probably impossible for logic, reason, and rationality to break through and make the truth clear to them. How miserable a human being must be that he or she humbles themselves in such a manner and does not trust themselves, does not know how to direct their life well and correctly, does not determine everything connected with it himself or herself, takes it in hand and lives it. This, however, is to be discarded by the human being if he or she wants to live correctly, to lead and do everything himself or herself, so that they do not have to place an imaginary fantasized God above themselves, and are not delusionally addicted to a faith, but is himself or herself.
Contact Report 848.
But the fact that the foreigners who came to Earth from the far reaches of space were then idolized as gods by the Earthlings in their ignorance and are still idolized today, albeit modified in terms of religion to a dear God in the main religions, such as in Catholicism, Protestantism, and all the thousand-fold Christian sects, is truly only a delusion, but one that has brought disaster upon Earth's humanity to this day.
Contact Report 855.
Truly it is urgently necessary that the human beings of the Earth themselves begin to cultivate sensible thoughts, and finally understand that no dear God already regulates everything and brings the hoped-for peace to the human being, as well as finally ends all war and that it will never come again. It is for the human beings of Earth to finally grasp and understand that it is they alone who think up and direct everything and anything, and that they themselves are what they call God and worship senselessly, because there really is no God, and this imaginary figure is only a humanly fanciful invention.
Contact Report 857.
Since the Earthlings have made gods and religions out of the foreigners and those who have come from far away, and have also sparked religious wars out of them, and demanded human sacrifices in their delusion of God, this delusion of religions has remained until today.
Contact Report 858.
Also concerning the so-called UFOs, that is to say their crews, who were also the Dagon, the gods they let themselves be idolized as.
Contact Report 862.
Also in this Dern universe, and on this world, the Earth, foreigners came very early, who created influences whereby in time the natural of evolution constantly diminished, and what led the human beings of this world to degeneracy, whereby invaders of such inhabitants into other planetary systems, and thus when appearing on other worlds, have acted and continue to act as gods and the like to their halfway intelligent inhabitants, if they are not met with logic, understanding, and reason, and consequently, because they are highly developed in their knowledge and skill and in their technology, etc., are seen and worshipped as gods. For more and more influence is exerted by the religions, just as for some time now the foreigners have also been making themselves more and more felt, acting as gods, which is why the killing of human beings began, who were intended as offerings to the gods. This was because the foreigners did not intervene and did not stop the horrors in this regard, although they came here and demanded that human beings should not be sacrificed or killed in any other way. This, however, gave rise to new strife among the human beings in this world, for the views developed that under all circumstances the statements of the foreigners had to be given conscientious consideration, which ultimately led to delusional ideas that these statements corresponded to a commandment and law and were classified accordingly, with the meaning that severe punishments were to be meted out if they were violated. On the one hand, this was a misunderstanding of the whole, and on the other hand, only the killing of those who violated it was appropriate. So it was not far off that human sacrifices were quickly demanded and offered in order to win the conscientious attention of the foreigners, that is to say, gods, and to reassure them when what they claimed to do correctly was violated. But how they taught and demanded not to kill was misunderstood by human beings and, moreover, disregarded, so that people did not think and act according to the true meaning. Killing thus became a case of quick revenge and retribution from time immemorial, and this in turn gave rise to hatred, hence also wars, terror, degeneracy, destruction, extermination, and murder, etc. Faith-wise, everything in this regard was spread and practiced very quickly. Thus, through the appearance and the misleading teaching of the foreigners to the earth humans, exactly the wrong thing was done, which has been preserved until today, namely that which should never become with the human beings, namely a faith in place of thinking for oneself and grasping reality and truth.